Hi, welcome to So Little Time Quilting. I'm Colleen Granger, and today we are going to be doing Sunny Side Up. It is a project that uses partial seams in order to be able to complete the project. As you can see, if you would try to make this without partial seams, it's impossible. Partial seams are very easy, and I will take you step by step. The first thing that you need to do is you need to cut your pieces and you need to lay them out. This looks a little wonky at this moment, but that's because you don't have any of your seam allowances sewn. I label everything and I follow my layout page so that I know where everything belongs. So the first thing that we are going to do is on these pieces, we are going to connect the lower sashing strip to them. So let's do step number one. We're going to place the bottom sashing along the bottom edge of block A. We are sewing with a 1/4 inch seam. And here we go. You don't have to back tack, and I always press from the right side of the fabric. So you push your seam allowance down. All the seams are going to be facing the sashing, and you press with a nice hot dry iron. And then you're ready to put it in place. Now that we have the bottoms of most of our pieces sewn on, we are now going to add the sashing strips to the right of D, the right of G, the left of B, and the left of I. That's our next step, again with a 1/4 inch seam, and we are pressing towards the sashing. By the way, I always use labels for my marking of my pieces. I use ones that are designed for a laser. That way, if you hit them with an iron, they won't share their sticky on the back side. If you use inkjet labels, they will share their sticky on your pieces. So, laser style labels work the best for quilting. Sewing with a 1/4 inch seam, no need to back tack because they're going to get caught in another seam allowance. And we are going to press with a hot dry iron, pressing towards the sashing. Oh, we really should be doing it there, not over that big hole. We've got our sashing on where we can, and our next step is our applique process. There are 2 different choices and instructions that come with this design. And in the pattern, you get all of the freezer paper templates already printed, and you pick the size that you want that's going to work for you. You have at least 2 of every pattern piece. So to start with, what we're going to do is we're going to cut out all of our pattern pieces, and we're going to cut right along these outside lines. When you come to this part where you have a center, just cut at a diagonal. That's always the easiest way to line up a freezer paper piece, at least the way that I have found, so that when you go to press it onto your fabric, it just automatically lays right the way you want it to. So these have already been pressed. What I do is I take my Steam-A-Seam 2. For this first applique process, this is the fusible one. And what I recommend is Steam Seam 2 Lite, because it's got that tacky back on it and it just makes life so much easier for you. So you peel off one side of the paper. I leave the yellow printed part up, and you just press it nicely with your hand, and you flip it over looking at the right side, making sure you have no lumps and bumps. And then what you do is you take your pattern pieces and you lay them out. Now, if you want to make it so it ombres correctly, then you can go in order. I like to take it and fool around with it so that I am doing all different kinds of colors, and it goes wherever I feel like, where it happens to drop. But remember, this is your quilt and you do what you want to do with it. So you place these in the colors where you want them to go. Now, once you have them in place with your hot dry iron, you just want to hold it down gently until that freezer paper wax presses itself and adheres to your fabric. On the back of the pattern, my suggested optional tools is double stick tape. I've always used Scotch brand. It's always worked well for me. So if you have problems with your freezer paper, use a little bit of double stick tape on the back side and it will hold your pieces in place. Now all you have to do is pick these up and cut them out along the edge. I have a whole set already cut out for me, and all you can see is the paper, and you just fold it over once and you can remove that part of the paper, and now you have sticky. That's the nice thing about Steam Seam 2. So we're starting with D, so let's get square D off our wall. Okay, we are going to start with block D. So we have block D here. I'm going to remove the tag for right now. Remove it. So we have removed the paper from the back side, and as you can see on the layout page, this piece goes about right here. This does not require any measurements. You just put it about where you want it to go. Again, if you pinch it slightly, it makes it easier for the paper to come off, and this. If you have difficulty getting your paper off, all you need to do is grab a pin and it will sometimes work. And aren't you glad that it doesn't always work for everybody? Oh, I used the wrong kind of backing fabrics for you to see this. Okay, let's remove D. And then we have D2. This is much easier to take this paper off because remember we had that slight cut. It peels off easily. We need to take the paper off the back. Again, fold it gently. I need to set this to music. That's always my excuse. Peel the backing paper. Slide it right into place. And the final one is D3. Take the backing off, take its label off, put it right smack dab in the center, and there you have it. So this piece is ready to go back on the board. You can top stitch this. You can press it with a hot dry iron to put it in place. If you want to wait, since you're using Steam Seam 2, you can wait until the very end to press it. So that way, if you want to move it up or down, you can. I like to make things my way. So, continue that process for all of the squares that have rings on them or sunshines, however you want to look at it. And then we'll get to the part where we're going to finish the final assembly. The other option for applique is to turn your edges so you have no raw edges showing. Again, we're using freezer paper templates and we'll make this job easier. You turn your fabric over, so you're going to work on the back side of your fabric. You can see your coloration of the ombre, and again, you just place your fabrics where you would like them to be so that you get the colorations that you want. With a hot dry iron, you want to press them in place. Again, if you're having problems with the freezer paper, you can use double stick tape. I've always used Scotch brand and have had a lot of success with it. It stays with the paper and does not come off on your fabric. So for this project, what you want to do is you want to trim at approximately 1/4 inch away from your pattern pieces. You do want to cut along the lower edge, your blunt edge here. You want to cut smooth with your fabric and your pattern piece. You want to leave about 1/4 inch all the way around on both the top and the bottom of your curve. I got a little close there, but we'll work with that. And you're going to cut again like this. The next thing you're going to do with each one of your arcs is I use fabric finish, and I use magic spray sizing very lightly, very, very lightly. And with the hot dry iron, you just pull your fabric in and only on the outside edge, and you very carefully pull it right to your paper. As long as you spray it lightly, the sizing is not going to saturate the paper, so it won't distort. Okay, once we have all of our pieces nicely pressed over, we are not doing the inside of the curve, just the outside. Then what you do is remove the freezer paper, and if you need to, press it again just gently. I always press it from the front side too to get a nice crisp edge. Then my next favorite tool is Roxanne's Glue Baste. This is the larger tube and it's fun easy because it fits into the palm of your hand, and you just very carefully put little tiny dots. This is like way more dots than big dots that I really need, because you just need little bits. I'm making them larger for the camera so that you can see what I'm doing. Once you have this edge in place, you are going to look at your layout page. Oops, D's up here. And we want to put this along our outside edge. Again, you don't have to measure exactly where it's going. Align your raw edges and then very carefully press it in place. If you want to make sure that it's dry, if you want to speed up the drying process, take your hot dry iron and very gently press it lightly until the glue has dried. Then you're ready for your next piece. And on your centerpiece, or on your next piece, when you have this center, it's optional if you want to remove that piece of fabric. Remove your edge or your freezer paper, remove your freezer paper, lightly glue it in place, and then you're going to center it onto that arc, lining up your raw edge. Get it all over your fingers, and lastly, your center. You should be able to reuse your freezer paper pieces about 6 times. Remember, if they don't stick when you want them to, use your double stick tape, and that will hold them in place. The Roxanne's Glue Baste is a water-soluble glue, so when and if this ever gets washed, the glue will disappear. Okay, so you take your last piece, hopefully, without getting too much glue all over you. And using your favorite decorative stitch, you can use a matching or a contrasting thread to top stitch all your pieces down. Now we're going to go to the assembly. Okay, now we have all of our little pieces and rings all where they belong, and they're all pressed and happy. When you go to quilt your quilt, when you're finished, you can top stitch these edges and it will be part of your quilting design. Seems to work really well for me. Anyway, now for the assembly. The first thing we're going to do is our partial seam. We're going to put A to B. We're going to start at the upper edge. We're going to put the sashing on top, and we're going to sew half the length of block A. You know, if you need to use pins for your comfort level, by all means use pins. I have a natural aversion to them, I don't know why. So here we go. I still, again, do not back tack. I just simply cut my threads, and again, I press my seam towards the sashing. So we have our A and B together. Now we're going to add C. Okay, and again, we're pressing to the sashing. Alrighty, so if we put this up here, our next logical progression is D. So we'll put D sashing on top. And I always start with my center of the quilts, which would be the sashing strip. That way, if my 1/4 inch seams and your 1/4 inch seams are different, then we can always trim along the outside edge, and it looks like maybe we should do that. Or maybe I just cut wrong. So, if we go to the end of D, we will find that C is a little bit long. So when we finish pressing everything, we will trim that up before we start to quilt. Okay, now that we have that piece done, we're going to start with our lower section. Okay, for our second unit, we're going to sew block F to G. Again, with the sashing starting at the top of the sashing strip so that we're working from the center out. We are only going to sew a half of a seam. I don't back tack because I'm going to sew over it when I go to finish off this seam, and I am going to press. Next step, we're going to press this to the AD. So this looks a little sloppy at this point because we have a half a seam here and we have a half a seam here, but in just a moment we'll be taking care of that. We'll press this all to the sashing. again from the right side to make sure we don't get any of those cute little tucks. Now you can see that we can finish block B. Woohoo! Lost its label. Block B is going to get sewn to there. So we're going to finish off that seam. So I start about a ½ inch on top of the old stitch line, and we will proceed all the way down to the end of the block. Whoops. Go. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add our FB sashing to the bottom of F and B. Label's a little bit too large, so I don't want to sew it into the seam allowance. Okay, our next step is to put E below F. Another partial seam. And I just pressed that wrong. Still want to press to the sashing. And then we're going to finish this G seam. Okay, to maintain my 1/4 inch seam, I am using one of my So Nice seam guides. It screws into the faceplate of your featherweight sewing machine. Very handy to have and available at SoLittleTimeQuilting.com and the TwiceNiceShop.com. Okay, so let's press this seam. It's coming together. Okay, so our next block to add is block H. We'll put that onto the sashing, and then we'll finish up with I. Do 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 do. The little circles in block B and block G are optional. You can add those if you want. If you don't, don't. Okay, I's gonna go next to E and H. This is like building a jigsaw puzzle. And the last step is sewing these all together. Okay, for our last seam, where we're going to finish up that partial seam, we want to sew approximately 1/2 inch on top of the seam that was already started. That way it'll lock all of our stitches and sew to the end of the block. And do your pressing. Then what I do recommend is, I left all these labels on for the demonstration purpose, but you can take them off as you go. And then you can give your piece a good final pressing. If you want to use steam, go ahead. That will help set all of your steam seam 2 in place. And then you can layer this and turn it into a creation that you will like. I plan on making several of these for placemats. The other thing you can do is you could sew 2 of them together end to end, and you could have a really cool table runner. You could put it this way. Of course, you'd probably want all your colors to be coordinated. Or you can make it into the larger quilt, which uses the larger template pieces. You can make 4 of those. This will make a nice lap quilt, or you can make 4 of those to make a twin size quilt. The one thing you want to make sure you do is have a good time. Thank you very much for your time. I'm Colleen Granger at SoLittleTimeQuilting.com.